Ari, thank you for joining me.
Hi, Matt. How you doing tonight?
Good, good. Hey, you sent me a fantastic update on an important topic that we've covered quite a few times in the past. And as I read through it again, I noticed some changes in the information that you had provided versus what we had before. A little bit of additional history, a little bit of what's coming in the future, some stuff about infrastructure that I didn't know, and I thought this would be a great opportunity to kind of, highlight what new updates there are and lead people into the information that's written below this video right here. And so we're talking about POTS lines, and those are old style legacy telephone lines that are on copper. I'm sure there's a much better explanation, and perhaps you have one for what a POTS line provides for somebody.
Back when we first started in this industry, we would connect our alarm panels to a telephone line. We would have basically a tape recorder playing a message saying there has been an emergency at the following address. Police really didn't like that. It tied up tied up their telephone lines, and if they had a false alarm or there was no way to get into the system, it would just tie up their whole telephone lines. So, what the industry started doing was having a central station where the signal would go to the central station, and then an operator at the central station would call the police and pass that information along.
Okay.
So eventually we went from having an analog system, just a tape recorded message, and we went to a digital system. The alarm panel would send a digital message very quickly to the central station. The computer at the central station would decode that message and flash the information up on an operator's screen, and
Okay.
the operator would read the information and then call the police.
Okay.
Okay,
So it was being translated into something that was more usable for the police department.
yes, so a tiny signal would be transmitted out through the telephone system and be routed to wherever the central station was, and then the central station operator could call the police. Being that it was a digital signal, the central station could be anywhere in the country. It
Okay.
would be sent out to a central station very quickly, much faster than human ears could hear it.
Okay. So, and this was all happening before and currently over a telephone line.
Over a regular telephone line, what we call POTS, or plain old telephone service.
Okay.
It's a copper wire transmitting a digital signal very quickly.
Okay. So, I would think that a copper telephone line is a pretty reliable way to get information back. Why is it that either they are being phased out or aren't reliable? Like what has changed that is making it that way?
Copper transmits an analog signal.
Okay.
So when a signal is being sent from an alarm panel to a central station, that equipment transmits a one-to-one signal. So the signal that is being output by the panel is a signal that's being heard by the receiver at the central station. The problem
Okay.
is with digital equipment, it's not a one-to-one signal anymore. The digital equipment compresses and digitizes the signal, and it does it in a way that the human ear can't tell the difference, but saves a significant amount of bandwidth, a significant amount of processing power, and it sends it off. The problem there is the digitization process will cut off some of the information. Now, because the alarm
Okay.
panel sends such a tiny signal, any any compression of that signal will lead to important information being lost and will lead to the alarm panel not being able to communicate with the central station in a reliable or predictable way.
Okay. So it's such a little burst, such a
Mhm.
small amount of data. Um, it's not that the phone line can't handle the data; it's that it's compressing it. It's even though it's small, it's losing that information. So what's a better way to do it than through these POTS lines?
So the alarm panel signal gets sent in a very small amount of time, in usually less than 3 seconds, which depending on the manufacturer of the panel.
Okay.
Now that signal is a pretty large signal, but it's being sent extremely quickly because the computer at the central station is capable of decoding a very large signal very fast.
Okay.
So you can no longer rely on a copper telephone line because the infrastructure in this country is no longer pure copper. A
Okay.
lot of the infrastructure, a lot of the telecom infrastructure in this country is being replaced by fiber and being replaced by digital processing equipment instead of copper and analog switching equipment.
Well, hold on. I thought that everybody wants fiber, right? You got Verizon Fios, you have security people putting fiber in, connecting IP cameras and network switches. Why in the POTS world is fiber not reliable, whereas in the internet protocol world, it is?
Everybody loves fiber because you can send more information faster than you could have with copper.
Okay.
The problem is the alarm panels are designed to transmit a signal in a specific way. And because copper always transmits the same signal in the same way, we could predict how the signal was going to arrive at the central station.
Okay.
Fiber doesn't do that. Fiber doesn't do that because fiber has to digitize the signal. And
Okay.
because fiber digitizes the signal slightly differently depending on how it's being routed, and because fiber can cut off the beginning or the end of the signal of the sound burst, basically,
Okay.
then it's going to cause part of the signal being lost. Now, there are ways around this. You can slow down the signal slightly. You can change the format of the signal, but those are only band aids.
Okay.
Those methods work most of the time, and most of the time just isn't good enough for life safety.
Okay. So if fiber is not going to be a good solution as part of the infrastructure for POTS lines, our option is to move to an IP communication.
Mm-hmm.
Some things that come to my mind are um, fiber is used in these IP connections, right? In my office here, I have a Verizon Fios connection. But I guess what you're saying is that the connection using fiber somewhere in the infrastructure for an internet protocol session is more reliable or predictable than fiber
Mm-hmm.
or just copper in a POTS line.
The the difficulty here is changing an analog signal to a digital signal and then back to an analog signal.
Okay.
So the solution here is to send out a digital signal from the start. If you send out a digital signal, it can be compressed and uncompressed and decompressed and recompressed, but at the end of it, the intended signal will always be output on the other side. So you could either send a native digital signal. That means you can send a signal that was digital. So if you have an alarm panel that has a built-in Ethernet port or has a built-in cellular connection, it will send a signal that's digital from the beginning. So
Okay.
once you send it through the fiber infrastructure or through the cellular connection and through the cloud and then back out the other end to the internet gateway at the alarm panel or at the central station, then it'll come out the same signal on the same side.
Okay. So there's some sort of like a check and balance to make sure that it actually went through the way it's supposed to, whereas just being lost and interpreted incorrectly.
Exactly, but that doesn't help you if you have an alarm panel out in the field. If you have an alarm panel or 100 alarm panels or 1,000 alarm panels, and they're all relying on telephone communication to send signals to the central station, you're going to be in big trouble. You can either replace those alarm panels, or you can accept that the alarm signal is not going to be reliable, or you can put some kind of digitizing equipment onto the alarm panel. You can add a piece of equipment to the alarm panel that will change the signal that's being sent out to a digital signal before it hits the transmission medium. So you
Okay.
get a lot of people like to call them universal dialers. They're not actually
Okay.
dialers, actually
Even though they're not dialing, it's just an old term, right?
it's just an old school term that tells you exactly what the product is doing. So you can get a product. There are a bunch of them on the market today. Uh, for example, the Bosch B465 is what's called a universal dialer, and it's called
Okay.
universal because it'll work with almost every alarm panel and almost every alarm reporting format in the market today.
Okay. So it doesn't care what it's connected to and who it's communicating with. It'll just take the signal, fix it the way you need it to for an internet transmission, and be done with it.
Exactly. It'll work with almost any format on the market. It'll work with almost every panel on the market. You don't need the you don't need the programming code to to get it set up. You don't need to reprogram the panel to get it set up. All you do is you unplug the RJ41X. You take out the line seizure module. You plug it into the B465. You plug the B465 into either a network drop into the Ethernet port, or you can use the cellular component to transmit a signal over cellular, or you can do both. The great
Okay.
thing about the B465 is it's UL listed, so you can use it for fire alarm control panels as well. It can
Okay.
work at sole path, dual path, or single or secondary path of communication.
Okay. So what this has been, we've been writing articles and making videos for several years now about this topic. And it seems to me that there's this, well, nothing's wrong yet. I'll just deal with it when the phone company calls and says I can't have a phone line anymore.
Mm-hmm.
But you're talking about this, the infrastructure behind it, the fiber creating a potential problem, which is not something as an end user, a manager of a premise that I would ever know until there's a problem.
Right.
So is this an industry problem that's just kind of maintaining, or are there things happening that are causing, I don't want to say a sense of urgency, but um, is there a compelling reason I need to think about this as a property manager or factory administrator or whoever, anybody involved in security and notifying authorities that there's a problem? Do I need to hurry up and fix this, or is there some time that I have to worry about it?
For a long time, the telcos would replace the infrastructure end to end. So they would start out replacing the exchange and then run fiber all the way to the premise, and then they would connect fiber to the premise.
Okay.
What that meant was you would know if you had fiber or not because somebody in a truck came to your house, came to your factory, came to your business, knocked on the door and said, "We need access to your DMARC because we're changing you over from copper to fiber today." In fact, they would have to notify you and let you know that that was going to be happening.
Okay.
Now, the telcos are using a process called FTTX. So fiber to the, and then X will
To the
be whatever.
whatever, X being whatever. Okay, the variable.
They're right. They're replacing the infrastructure piece by piece. When a copper component fails, they're going to be replacing that component with fiber. So if an exchange fails or an exchange needs to be repaired or to be maintained, instead of doing that, they're just going to replace that exchange or that mile or that node with a fiber equivalent.
Okay.
They only have to notify you when they're going to be doing fiber to the premise,
Okay.
which is fiber at your specific location.
Yeah, I mean that makes
But
sense. They might interrupt your business or your operation or whatever while they're trying to do that.
and there's very little way you'll know if there's fiber anywhere along the path that your telephone call is going to take from the alarm panel to the central station. But if there's any fiber in that path at all, it's possible that your alarm signal will be compromised or your alarm signal will not be translated faithfully.
Okay.
And here in the Northeast, I know that Hurricane Sandy did quite a number to telephone infrastructure, as it did to a lot of infrastructure. That just accelerated the pace of fiber adoption. So a lot of fiber is being put out. A lot of fiber is already out being used in the field.
Okay.
And even if you don't have fiber at your premise, even if you have your your alarm panel connected to copper, there
Mhm.
may be fiber somewhere in your path. So
Okay.
it is now is the time for people to think of a plan for how they're going to adopt uh, IP or another digital transmission path for their uh, intrusion detection systems and for their fire alarm control panels.
So in the article that you wrote, there's a lot of terminology that even being in the security industry, I don't understand.
Mm-hmm.
I imagine if I was in the telephony industry, might not be such a big deal. So we have this gap to bridge of understanding of what implications are created by each different change in technology, adoption of a new technology, removal of an old technology. So in the end, you and our team are responsible for helping people through this, right?
Exactly. If anybody has any questions, I'm happy to come down, show them exactly what the problem is, and walk you through what the solution might be.
Okay. Well, I appreciate the overview of the article below. It is complicated, and sometimes life safety can be involved in it. So it's critically important that people take a look at this and really pay attention to it and engage you for some good advice. So thank you for your time today. I appreciate it, and look forward to seeing you next time.
My pleasure. Thanks so much, Matt.
All right, Ari.